Girl, don't go for that. It's not...
Go to jail.
I need to confess something slightly embarrassing. A few years ago, when I was doing therapy, I had this moment when I was telling my therapist about my dating history. And I realized something that made me pause mid-sentence, because the story started something like this. Well, that guy was emotionally unavailable, and that one had commitment issues, and that one had unresolved trauma, and that one, honestly, I think he just needed therapy. And my therapist was just sitting there in front of the camera, looking at me quietly, suspicious, like someone watching a crime documentary when they realize the killer is still in the room. And she goes like, okay, but have you ever considered the possibility that you might be part of the pattern? And listen, I wish I could tell you I reacted in a mature, emotionally intelligent way, but my first reaction was, excuse me? What do you mean I'm part of the pattern? And she just looked at me and said something that has lived rent-free in my brain ever since. She said, well, you seem to keep finding the same type of men. Yep. And suddenly, the room got very quiet. Because she was right, you know? Different names, different jobs, very different haircuts, but the same type of emotional dynamic. And that's when I had one of the most uncomfortable realizations you can have in your dating life, which is that sometimes you're not just the victim in the story. Sometimes you're also the co-author in it. Now, before everyone listening panics and turns this episode off, I want you to relax. This is not about blaming yourself for everything that has ever gone wrong in your relationships. Some people really are walking red flags. Some people should come with a literal warning label. And some people are emotionally unavailable and also texting you, "Good morning, beautiful," at 2 a.m. like a confused vampire. But there is a conversation the internet doesn't love having, which is that sometimes we are also bringing chaos into those relationships. And the wild thing is, when you realize that, your dating life actually gets so much easier. Because, you know, if the problem is always other people, you're powerless. But if part of the problem is your patterns, you can change them with some work, of course. It's not that easy. But then suddenly your love life stops feeling like a Russian emotional roulette. Now, before we even get into red flags, we need to talk about something extremely real. And this is what I call romantic delusional brain. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like when you meet someone, you go on one good date, but then suddenly your brain starts writing an entire Netflix series about your future together. One date. And your brain is like, okay, but what if this is my husband? Because I've been there and I had to say to myself, girl, relax. You don't even know his middle name. He could be, I don't know, collecting fishing sticks. Or he could believe that birds are, I don't know, government drones. Or maybe he cries if the Wi-Fi stops working. Like, you have absolutely no idea. But the thing is that our brain doesn't care. Because when we meet someone new, our brain releases that crazy amount of dopamine. And when that happens, basically our brain goes like, oh, wow, this is such a shiny new human. And when dopamine is running the show, logic takes a little vacation for sure. It's like you suddenly start to imagine future vacations. Or you're imagining introducing him to your friends, or imagining the two of you cooking dinner together. Meanwhile, you just know this man for 6 hours. And this is how people end up emotionally invested in someone that they barely know. Because they're not reacting to reality, they are reacting to a story that their brain has just created. Let me tell you about someone I dated years ago. Let's call him Daniel. Not his real name. I don't want to call him his real name. But honestly, every girl has dated a Daniel at some point. Daniel was like super charming. He was funny. Daniel was the kind of man who made eye contact when he talked to you. And come on, like, ladies, you know, eye contact alone is enough to confuse us emotionally for at least 3 months. And Daniel also had this thing where he would say really emotionally intelligent sentences like, I'm working on becoming a better man. Oof, which sounds amazing, you know, except he had been working on becoming a better man for approximately 9 years, and nothing was changing. But in my head, I had created this beautiful story. I was like, he's just misunderstood, he's healing, he's evolving. Meanwhile, the man was emotionally unavailable and also somehow always busy between 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. But my brain had fallen in love with potential Daniel. Potential Daniel was absolutely emotionally available. Potential Daniel was stable and he was communicating very clearly. But the actual Daniel, not so much. And that's when I learned one of the most humbling lessons about dating. You cannot date someone's future personality. You can only date the person standing in front of you. In front of you, please. So let's talk about the first red flag, which is falling in love with potential. This is one of the most common patterns that people have, that we have mostly. It's like you meet someone, you see amazing qualities in them, but instead of evaluating who they actually are, you start imagining who they could be if they healed, if they opened up emotionally, if they went to therapy. Girl, you are not a rehabilitation center. You are not running free emotional therapy for men who may or may not attend. And I love psychology because psychology actually explains why this happens. There's something called intermittent reinforcement. It's the same psychological trick that casinos are using. You get a reward, then you get nothing. Then you get a reward again. Your brain becomes addicted to the possibility of the next good moment, not the relationship, like literally to the possibility. And that's how we stay emotionally invested in actual situations that never actually become healthy. Let me tell you something humbling. At some point, I look back at several relationships and I realized something slightly terrifying. The emotional dynamic looked kind of suspiciously familiar, like different guy, different city, or circumstances, but always the same pattern. And eventually, I had to ask myself a question my ego absolutely did not freaking enjoy. What if the issue isn't just the man I'm meeting? What if the issue is also the man I'm choosing? And that realization alone was very uncomfortable. But also, it kind of felt freeing because once you see the pattern, like I said, you can break it if you actually put in the effort. So, after my therapist said that sentence to me, you know, you might be part of the pattern, I did something that was honestly a little bit dramatic. I went for a walk and then I came back home. I sat on my bed. I opened my notes app and I literally started writing down every relationship I'd ever had, which already sounds like the beginning of a psychological crisis. But stay with me. Because when I wrote them all down, something weird started happening. Like I wasn't just remembering the men. I started remembering my reactions. The moments where I overthought something small, or the moments where I convinced myself a relationship was deeper than it actually was, or the moments where I ignored obvious red flags because the connection felt super exciting. And one memory, actually in particular, made me laugh a lot out loud when I remembered it. You know, it perfectly captures something I now call the texting spiral. Okay, I want you to picture this. I had been seeing this guy for a couple of weeks. Things were going well. We were kind of texting every day, not constantly, but enough that it felt like a rhythm was like kind of forming. You know, that early stage of dating when the texting frequency feels like emotional oxygen. And then one day, he didn't reply. Now, normally this would not be a problem. You know, like people are busy, people work, people exit outside their phones. But when you're slightly emotionally invested and your brain is a little anxious, yeah, that's when your brain starts doing something fascinating. It kind of starts writing stories. So at first, my brain was calm. I was just thinking, well, maybe he's probably just busy. Totally reasonable. Then 1 hour passed, then 2, and then 3. And then, girl, suddenly my brain started opening files that should not have been opened in the first place. Files that sounded like, did I said something weird? Maybe he lost interest. Well, maybe he met someone else. Or maybe he's secretly married. You know, those kind of thoughts. But here's the funniest part. During this entire spiral, I was also checking his Instagram. Because, of course, I was. And at one point, I noticed something truly criminal. He had viewed my story. Okay? But still hasn't replied to my text. Ladies, you know exactly what happens in that moment. Because now this is not just a delayed reply. Now this is evidence. Now my brain becomes a full FBI investigation unit. Suddenly, I'm analyzing timestamps. I'm calculating the time difference between when he viewed the story and when my message was sent. I'm looking for certain patterns like I'm solving a freaking murder mystery. Meanwhile, the man was probably just busy, or driving, or at a dinner, or doing literally anything that normal human beings do. But my brain had already decided the relationship was collapsing. And when he finally replied, 4 hours later, criminal, his message was, sorry, I was in meetings all day. Completely normal explanation. And that's when I had to laugh at myself because my brain had written an entire Netflix thriller based on one delayed text. And this is where the second red flag comes in. You blame their avoidance, but you ignore your anxiety. Now listen, sometimes people really are avoidant. Sometimes people really do pull away when things get emotional. But sometimes the dynamic is actually being created by both people reacting to each other. Because, when anxiety shows up in dating, it does something interesting. It makes the brain look for that confirmation. If you, for example, already fear someone might lose interest, your brain is going to start filtering stuff and interpreting neutral things, for example, as proof. A delayed text, boom, proof. Different tone, boom, another proof. Less emojis, again, another proof. Your brain becomes a detective trying to confirm that fear. And suddenly small things like that, they feel like big signals. But what I actually learned over time is that anxiety and intuition are very, very different things. Intuition, it's calm, it's quiet, it's very clear. Whilst anxiety, it's loud and it feels urgent and mega dramatic. Anxiety usually says something is wrong and you need to fix it immediately. And normally intuition kind of says something feels off. Try to pay attention. And I swear to God that learning the difference between these two voices changed the entire way that I was approaching dating or communicating, both of them. And I want to share with you the habit that saved me from myself because I was a terrible thing. One thing that really helped me break the texting spiral was something very simple, actually. Whenever I felt that urge to kind of react emotionally, I waited. Not forever, of course. I have my own limits. But just kind of long enough for my nervous system to calm down. Sometimes that meant waiting for an hour. Sometimes it meant waiting until the next morning. Because, emotions that feel incredibly urgent in the moment often look super different once you actually give it time to settle down. And this tiny, tiny pause prevented so many unnecessary conflicts for me. Because many relationships problems are not actually problems. They're mostly their anxiety reactions. I swear, that's what they are. Now, let's talk about another pattern that is extremely common but very rarely talked about: the disappearing woman. You know exactly who I'm talking about. You meet someone, you like them, and suddenly your entire life quietly disappears. Your routines are vanishing, your hobbies are vanishing. Your friends even are starting to text you, like asking if you're maybe like still alive or if something happened, because it's all very confusing. But the moment you start liking someone, your entire world starts orbiting around them. Plans revolve around them. Your mood revolves around them. Your emotion stability revolves around whether they text you back. And now someone you meet 3 weeks ago has somehow become responsible for your entire emotional ecosystem, which is a lot of freaking pressure. A lot of pressure. I've been there. I literally been there. Like, I don't know, probably 7 years ago, I really been there and I would never go back, but it teached me something. So anyways, I want to talk to you about the attraction paradox. Is a really good topic that I wanted to add in this episode. And it's about when people are often most attracted to someone who already has a full life. Someone with friends, someone with passions, someone with routines, someone who is excited about their own life, But the moment you abandon your life to make space for someone, that dynamic shifts. Now, instead of two independent lives coming together, one life shrinks while the relationship grows. And that particular imbalance does create a lot of pressure. Healthy attractions usually happens when two people choose each other, not when one person becomes the center of the other's universe, not when you have to shrink yourself. Okay, we need to talk about the fourth red flag. And this one is very sneaky because people often think it means that they're emotionally mature. But, sometimes it just means their anxiety is wearing a blazer and maybe pretending to be a life coach. The red flag is this: wanting certainty before you actually have clarity. And let me explain. You meet someone, you go on a couple dates. The vibe, it's good. You're, let's say, laughing, you're flirting, you're slightly emotionally invested. And suddenly, your brain is like, so, okay, where is this going? What are we? Are you serious about me? Meanwhile, you met this person 11 days ago. You don't know how they behave when they're stressed. You don't know how they handle conflict. You don't even know if they leave dirty dishes in the sink for 6 business days like a feral raccoon. You literally know nothing. But your brain wants answers now, immediately, in fact. Because uncertainty makes the brain very uncomfortable. So instead of letting the relationship develop naturally, the brain starts trying to fast forward the movie. It's just like starting a Netflix show and immediately skipping to the final episode because you want some emotional closure. But relationships don't work like that. And I hope you don't watch Netflix series like that, because that would be really bad. The reality is that you don't get clarity in week number 2. You get some hints. And those hints slowly turn into some patterns. And this is how you make an idea of what are we. Let me tell you about something I witnessed once that changed the way I see early dating. Because this is going to make more sense of what I was just saying before. So, a friend of mine met a guy at a party. They talked for like an hour. He was very charming, I have to say. He was funny. He had nice hair. You know that type. And a week later, she called me saying, or like 3 days later, something that made me choke on my coffee, literally. She goes like, I don't know if he's serious about me. And I was like, serious about what? And then she goes, well, we've been talking for 3 days or like a week, I don't remember. And I just feel like I need clarity. 3 days, okay? 72 hours. Or like, let's say a week. That man was not her boyfriend, okay? I want you to like process this. He was barely her acquaintance. He was still basically a stranger with very good lightning. But, you know, her brain had already jumped ahead like 5 chapters. And this is something modern dating culture has made extremely, extremely common. People kind of want emotional certainty before they've even like kind of gathered enough information about the person. It's just like kind of asking someone to commit to a road trip before you even know if they have like, I don't know, a driving license. Also, can we talk about the what are we conversation for a second? That conversation is one of the most anxiety-filled moments in modern dating. You're kind of sitting there trying to sound casual while internally you're having a psychological meltdown. In your head, it's kind of going like, so I was just thinking, where do you see this going? Meanwhile, your heart is beating like you're defusing a bomb. And the other person is like, we've had 3 dates. Now, don't get me wrong. Clarity is very important. Communication is very important. But timing really freaking matters. Because, you know, asking for clarity too early often comes from fear, not wisdom. Fear on uncertainty, fear of being hurt, or fear of investing in something that might not work out in the end. And the uncomfortable truth about relationship, it's this. You cannot eliminate uncertainty. You can only kind of move through it. Here's something that took me a long time to understand. Healthy relationships are kind of often boring at first. Not boring, but calm. There's no emotional roller coaster. There is also no intense anxiety. There's no constant wondering if the other person is about to disappear. And when your nervous system is so used with intensity, calm can feel very confusing. You might think something is missing. What's missing is just chaos. And chaos is not the same thing as chemistry. Let me say that again because it's important. Chaos, it's not chemistry, girl. It's not. Chaos is just the stress with good lightning or bad lightning, whatever you prefer. You know, the moment everything clicked for me, it was at some point in my life I had the realization that changed the way I approached relationships. I stopped asking, do they like me? And I kind of started asking, do I like how I feel when I'm around them? Like, do I feel calm? Do I feel respected? Or do I feel like myself? Or am I just constantly feeling like I'm analyzing signals and trying to decode someone's behavior, like I'm solving a damn puzzle? Because love should not feel like a part-time detective job. Absolutely freaking not. So once I started seeing these patterns in myself, I realized something. Self-awareness is great, you know, it's a great tool. But awareness without action doesn't change anything. So I started practicing a few small things that made a huge difference. First, I slowed down emotional investment because I was such a generous girl. So instead of deciding someone was amazing after 2 conversations, I did give myself permission to observe. Second, I stopped reacting immediately to anxiety. If I kind of felt the urge to send a long emotional text, I waited. And 90% of the time, the problem really disappeared on its own. Third one, I started paying attention to behavior instead of potential. That was a big one. Because, you know, behavior tells the truth. Potential just tells stories. Beautiful stories, but not realistic stories. So before we end this episode, I want to say something that I hope is going to stick with you. The sticked with me, and it changed the way that I see life in general. There's something strangely powerful about the moment you realize you might be the pattern. Not because it means you've done everything wrong, of course not, but because it means you're not powerless anymore. If every relationship failure is someone else's fault, then your future depends on luck, you know? But if part of the pattern belongs to you, then your future depends on growth, on your growth. And that's actually good news. Self-awareness, it's not punishment. It's freedom. Freedom to stop repeating the same dynamics and freedom to choose differently. And that beautiful freedom to build relationships that feel calmer, safer, and much, much more real and authentic. Once you start doing that work on yourself, something very interesting happens. The people you're attracted to start changing too. Not because, the world suddenly becomes better, but because you become different. And that's when love stops feeling like chaos and it starts feeling like peace. So I guess this concludes today's episode. If you found it relatable or attacked or anything, well, I guess it's just another one of those like conversations that you're having with yourself at 2 a.m. But I hope it brought some clarity. To be honest, it did brought clarity when my therapist brought it in our therapy sessions. I love her very much. It was amazing. And the beautiful part is that now I get to say these things to other people in a good way. And don't forget to share this episode with someone that might relate to and have something to talk about until next Thursday when I'm going to release the next episode of the podcast. Well, I wish you a beautiful week. Mwah.